This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am Kevin Randle, and I will be hosting, as they say. I'm flying solo today because of a number of things. Number one is there's a lot of things I wanted to talk about that don't really line up with a single guest. There's a multitude of different things I wanted to kind of chat of. And I had a experience in the last week where one of my security cameras tripped and there's some kind of strange object, strange light on the video, which we'll talk about later on. But I wanted to kind of discuss that and show everybody what it is and have a picture of that area in the daylight so that you can see that there's really nothing there that would have caused the light. So we'll go into that as well. But as I say, there's an awful lot of things going on in the UFO field that don't necessarily have to do with sighting reports. Yeah, I keep looking at my notes. That's why I keep looking away, so that you would know that. One of the things I wanted to talk about is this idea of disclosure, which has gotten a lot of play in the last couple of years. I think it started with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal's articles in the New York Times about the Navy cockpit videos and that sort of thing. And it kind of expanded from there and got a lot of attention, got a lot of media interest that was not the tongue-in-cheek, oh, you're seeing aliens type things, but legitimate interest. And I tell the story back 30 years ago, and I hate to say it was that long ago, but Don Schmitt and I, of course, were doing the Roswell investigation, and we had an interview scheduled with the Chicago Tribune. And we showed up at time. We were met in the hallway by an intern. We did not get into the city room. The intern did the interview and said at the end of the interview, which was very short, by the way, that the editors just didn't believe in this stuff. So you can see now that we get some interest in the news media that is not that kind of an attitude, that they're interested in finding some answers. We've progressed a little bit. I thought at the time, and this was 2017, that we would be moving toward disclosure. I now think that was a mistake. We're no closer today than we were back then. But I think it was important because it interested the Congress in this, and there were congressional hearings or investigations, which again didn't go all that well for our side. In one of the hearings, there were two Pentagon spokesmen and a number of, I think, representatives who didn't really know much of anything about it. What caught my attention was during the conversation, one of the congressmen mentioned Malmstrom Air Force Base, and there was a big sighting there in 1967. Sighting is in Project Blue Book, labeled as Belt, Montana, but this is the sighting in which a whole flight of missiles was deactivated from outside, which supposedly was impossible to do. And it became a matter of national security simply because of that one fact. And so we have the sightings from Belt, Montana that really don't reference much about Malmstrom Air Force Base. But in that discussion, one of the congressmen asked the two representatives about the Malmstrom Air Force Base encounter. And they both said, well, we don't know anything about that. We haven't heard about that, which I thought was strange because it was, in fact, a matter of national security. But toward the end of that meeting, that investigation, that, shall we call FUBAR, one of the spokesmen did say that, yeah, he knew something about Malmstrom. So, that's kind of a lie, an embellishment. But it gives you kind of the attitude that, well, we don't know enough about this to really investigate it, but we're going to start now. So anyway, it seemed to me that it wasn't moving toward disclosure anymore. They came up with ARRO, the All Domain Anomalous Resolution Office, I think is what the acronym stands for. Could we get a more complex name, by the way? I think we could work on that if they really, really tried. But they were tasked with setting up an investigation, and all the meetings that were broadcast over the internet, and I sat here and watched them all, provided us with very little information on the status of UFO investigations or what the sightings that were being made. But it was more about the logistics of setting up the investigation and who they were going to talk to and how they were going to conduct it, not discussing sightings and what they had found. So it didn't really go where we wanted it to go. Just last week, the week before, the Defense Authorization Bill was passed by both houses of Congress. And in the original bill, there was a section that dealt with what they call UAP. I prefer to call it UFOs, or flying saucers, or alien spacecraft, or off-world craft for that matter. But in the final version, that apparently has been stripped way down so that it says very little about that. I was looking at my note there, but it doesn't tell me the exact wording. But it moved from the point where they were talking about everything that needed to be done to the point, well, we want to come some kind of report here in 6 months, and it really didn't task anybody to do that. At the same time, we had Sean Kirkpatrick, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who was appointed as the director of APRO, or the leader of APRO, and he issued a 65-page report. That's kind of where I picked up on the off-world comment, because that caught my attention because of Blade Runner, the science fiction movie with, is it Harrison Ford in it? Chasing the replicants, and they were talking about migrate to the off-world colonies, and so I kind of picked up on the off-world. But his report suggested there was nothing to this. They couldn't find anything. The reports, they solved a great number of the sightings, and had they sufficient information, the others would have been able to solve them as well. Which is the line from Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, the Condon Committee. If we had adequate information, we could have gotten found a solution for all of the sightings rather than the residue that remained unresolved. I don't think that's true. I think there's a number of cases where they got all the information they needed and they still couldn't resolve it, so they wrote it off as something ridiculous. And I hate to mention Level Land again, but that's the best example where we have literally dozens of people. The sheriff actually said they had hundreds of reports coming into the office. They were reporting this large glowing object, and if it approached your car would stall, and that sort of thing. And the Air Force wrote it off as ball lightning. It gives you an idea of the intensity of the investigation. I think the official investigator spent nearly 7 hours investigating that in Level Land, and we don't know where he was for a number of those hours. He visited the sheriff, he went off to did something, come back and visited with the sheriff again. So we didn't get a whole lot of information out. That became ball lightning. The point simply is Kirkpatrick's report was the same that we've seen dozens of times. We could resolve it if we had proper information. And there was one case from Austin, Texas at the end of Project Blue Book, in which they wrote it as insufficient data for scientific analysis. The witness, who worked with an Air Force lieutenant, wrote to Blue Book and complained about that solution. He said, what more information do you want? I gave you everything we had. We gave you the time. We gave you the distances. We gave you the locations. We gave you the observations that we made. What more information did you need? And the Air Force eventually changed the solution to unidentified, which I thought was kind of interesting. That was one of the last 3 unidentifieds in the Project Blue Book files. For those of you who want to look forward, it's at the very end of Project Blue Book. I've discussed it in a couple of books as well, and there may be some information on my blog about it as well. But I thought that was kind of important, looking at it from that point of view. Kirkpatrick said basically the same thing. You know, we looked at a lot of these sightings and we explained a lot of sightings, and that's true. I myself, in investigating UFO reports, learned that people can't identify Venus. I don't know how many times the solution was simply Venus. And if it's in close proximity of Earth, when their orbits kind of match, Venus can be very, very bright and can look very, very large. And if it's close to the ground, I've actually seen it where it seems like shooting rays or beams down toward the ground. So people are fooled by that. So I understand that there are problems with that. People being unfamiliar with what's going on in the atmosphere around them. So we get those sorts of things, but there is always this seeming attitude of those doing the investigations for the official investigation, we should say, for the government, that people just can't identify what they're seeing around them. It originally was that the people were drunk or ignorant. And I think we've kind of wiped that out in today's environment, because some of the best sightings come from highly educated people, highly trained people, and that sort of thing, who are completely sober at the time of the sightings, I should add. So we have to take a look at all that. So we need to reinvestigate some of Blue Book. And I think I've mentioned a sighting from Baltimore, Maryland in July of 1952, where the Air Force produced pages and pages of pages of why nothing happened there, because they had interviewed all these witnesses who were in the area and they didn't see anything. And I managed to get a copy of a newspaper article, thanks to Barry Greenwood, by the way, of the sighting, and discovered the Air Force had the date wrong. They're out there investigating it for, I think, March 29th or March 25th, and it really took place on March 14th. So if you go to the location and you're talking to people and say, what, did you see anything unusual on March 29th? They're going to say, no, I didn't see anything there. And you cannot write off a sighting from 10 days or a week earlier by saying, well, nobody there saw anything. And it turns out there were additional witnesses that came out in the newspaper article. And I think in the Air Force file, I identified the names of some of those people as well. But the simple point here is that the investigations done by the Air Force, for the most part, I'll say, were not as accurate as they could have been. They left a lot to be desired when they did their investigations. And so we go through the Blue Book files, and we find some very good sightings in there about that. And I'm looking to investigate that further. There's a number of places where it says case missing, and I thought it'd be interesting to find out what I could about those cases and see if there's something significant about them. I think we're going to find that most of them are the typical UFO sightings that may or may not have a terrestrial explanation. I don't think they're going to be anything spectacular, but I think it's something that needs to be done. And I know Barry Greenwood and some others have done this for some of the sightings. I was going to take it a little bit deeper. So what we see is from Sean Kirkpatrick, I had to look at my notes to see what I wrote there, was that the tactic used by him to dismiss, belittle the sightings was the same tactic they've been used for literally decades by the officers assigned to the official Air Force investigations, whether it was Sign, Grudge, or Blue Book, that they really couldn't find anything, and they could have answered all the questions if they had sufficient information. And that is not to say they didn't make up information, they didn't miss bets, and they didn't just make up solutions when there was none. So we've got to take a look at all that. And I think that kind of leads me into my next point, which I'll tackle in the next segment, which is the nature of evidence and how that is being misconstrued or misused to belittle the people who see UFOs. And as I say, take a look at my blog at kevinrandle.blogspot.com for more information, and I will be back right after this. As I say, I'm flying solo today because there are things that I wanted to talk about, and I thought it was important to elaborate on some of those. When we left, I thought I would switch now to, I guess, the nature of evidence as we talk about it. And I've noticed a trend in on the skeptical side of the aisle, in which if we present eyewitness testimony, they say, well, it's anecdotal, as if that doesn't count, that the witnesses are incapable of relating accurately what they observed. It's just anecdotal evidence. Doesn't explain what it was, just kind of dismisses it as being irrelevant. And that's as opposed to scientific observation. And what kind of always caught my attention in that was a scientist goes out and makes observations in the wild of some phenomenon and come back and report it. And that's good, that's okay. But if it's an average citizen, well, that becomes anecdotal testimony and it's not relevant. I will point out that there are problems with eyewitness testimony. There's no question about that. There was a study done at the in 1986 or beginning in 1986 when the Challenger exploded, and a professor at one of the colleges speaking to his incoming freshmen in his psychology class gave them a short questionnaire with 6 questions on it about the news of the day. where were you when it heard it, who were you with, that kind of thing, just elementary things about what they'd seen, what they'd done on that day. And he held those questionnaires for the 4 years that the students were in college. And when we got to the point where it was now a senior seminar or whatever it was, he asked the students the same thing, gave them the same questionnaire, and added a sixth question: how accurate do you think your memories are? And what he found out was 25% of them, the memories were very accurate. He could compare the two questionnaires and see that the students got it right. 50% of them, there were some alterations, minor changes in what they remembered or how they remembered it and things like that. Really not important changes, but changes nonetheless. And there was 25% that got it completely wrong. One girl he was talking to said that originally she had been in class when she heard about it and was with fellow students. And in the questionnaire that he handed out 4 years later, she said she was home with her parents. And he showed her the first questionnaire, and she says, "Well, I don't know about that. This is how I remember it." And what that tells us is that these flashbulb memories, as they call them, which I guess where we remember important events. For those of us who are old enough, I unfortunately am among them, remember the Kennedy assassination, and I remember how we learned about it. I was in junior high at the time, I think. Or when Princess Diana was killed, or Berlin Wall coming down, the towers coming down at 9/11. We remember these things, but oftentimes as we access those memories, we sometimes alter them. And there is input that we get from these important events. I mean, how many times did we see the Challenger explode? How many times did we see the towers come down? How many times did they run the footage of the tunnel in which Princess Diana had died in? And that colors our thinking and changes our memories of the events as well. And we have to be cognizant of that. If we get, we make an investigation and we're within a couple of days of the sighting or the event, and write that stuff down, it's pretty accurate. As we move away from that, sometimes they get altered completely. Elizabeth Loftus has done a lot of work on memory, and she talks about what was called Lost in the Mall, and the experiment run with the consent of everybody involved. So it wasn't one of these things she's spraying on anybody. But the parents talked to one of their children about, remember when you were lost in the mall? And the kid did come up with quite a bit of information about it. It turned out it was a story they had implanted purposely. Just talking about it. Remember when you were lost in the mall? Well, the kid was never lost in the mall. So it shows how memory can be manipulated. Now we have to be cognizant of that when we do our investigation, so that everything that we encounter, I guess, can alter those memories. And the very act of accessing the memory sometimes altered. I have told the story for literally decades, again, about how as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam on Thanksgiving, I left the Thanksgiving meal on the serving tray in the serving line because the flight crews were scrambled. I came across a letter that I'd written home talking about that, and it turns out, no, that didn't happen. We were actually deployed to, I think, Tay Ninh, and we were on standby in case some sort of prisoner exchange went on or went bad or something like that, and that we were promised the Thanksgiving meal, I think by the 1st Cavalry Division. Anyhow, the meal was crappy and they charged us for it. The other point I should make is, yes, there were times we left our meals either on the table or in the serving line when the flight crews were scrambled. So it's not that it was a completely inaccurate memory. It was just it didn't happen on Thanksgiving. And I had the documentation to prove it, so I had to come clean on that. But it's an important point that's what happens frequently on that. Yeah. The other thing we need to look at is gathering that information. We, as investigators, have to be careful we don't inadvertently add to the witness's comprehension of what he or she saw. I did see a video of two guys. They had been launching weather balloons with flares on them to see if they could convince people they were flying saucers and that sort of thing. And they manipulated the situation in unprofessional ways. The experiment was flawed by some of the things they did. But what was important there is I saw one of the witnesses on one of the cable news channels, I think it was CNN at the time, and she was describing the video that they had taken of the unidentified flying object. And the newscaster, the anchor said, "Oh, it's flashing a signal at you." And she said, no, it's passing behind trees. The trees didn't have leaves on them, the deciduous trees, and it was wintertime. And so she was aware enough to say, no, it's not flashing, that's caused by the trees. We later learned exactly what it was, and there were a number of reports that came out at the time that they were flares attached to balloons. So the witnesses were identifying what it was. Some of them were identifying and some of them weren't. And what the news media was directing the investigation. And the one interview that really annoyed me was a reporter talking to a little girl with a lollipop. Says, "What do you think of these aliens?" Well, A, you've just contaminated your source, and B, do you think a 6-year-old child is going to be able to adequately describe an alien spacecraft or some kind of alien event based on the observations of the child? But in the child's like 6 years old. Everything is new, everything is wondrous, everything is frightening. So I just don't know what the point was talking about the girl there. But the real point was the witnesses seemed to have a good handle on what they had seen, and the news media was driving it in a direction to suggest it was something else. So we have to take all of that into account. One of the things we need to think about is if there is corroborating evidence for these sightings. It's just not the witness seeing something in the sky, but there are photographs, or there are radar tracks, or it comes close to the ground, it interacts with the environment, it leaves landing traces. So it's not just a question of the witness telling us something that he or she had seen in the sky that's anomalous, that they can't identify. By the way, I'm going to divert for just a moment. My PhD dissertation was on how belief structure influences the identification of anomalous phenomenon. And I used a series of photographs of what I knew they were, but they were ambiguous photographs. You didn't know what they were. And I discovered that if you had a belief in alien visitations, then your identifications tended in that direction. Or if you were strictly religious, your identifications went in a different direction. Maybe it was more spiritual, maybe it were ghosts, something like that. So there is I guess a subset of this where your belief structures influence how you react to a stimuli, whatever it might be, without knowing it. And when I come up with the video that came from my security cameras, you'll see kind of what I mean by that. But it's an important point that we have to remember. But we do have a lot of sightings with photographs. We have sightings with radar. We have some that have multiple chains of evidence. And as we explore those chains of evidence, the sighting becomes better, more mysterious. Or as we examine those chains of evidence, we actually come up with the solution. When we look at this photograph, it looks anomalous. When we blow it up, when we can examine it more closely, we have a solution. I talked to a fellow in 1977, 1978 from Amana, Iowa, and he'd taken a series of photographs of a strange light crossing the sky. And we looked at that and we plotted it on a map, and we decided, well, it couldn't be a light plane because it was going too slow for that. Couldn't be some of these other things, this light plane with a landing light on. When we went out to the site, we saw that the aircraft was not flying strictly across the view, but it was at an angle which detracted from the speed. But more importantly, a number of years later, we had the opportunity, using some computer equipment and things like that, that we could blow up the picture to the point where we could see it. We actually identified the plane. We could see the light plane on it. So we had an anomalous photograph that we were able to use to explain the sighting. So it works both ways for us. If you have a photograph, it may be anomalous, it may not be explainable. but you may be able to find a solution by looking at it. Same thing with radar cases. There are cases in which what they call anomalous propagation, which is basically like inversion layer, where the light is actually refracted. So what you're seeing is not in the sky is not really where it is, it's somewhere else. And we've had a number of cases where the temperature inversion solution does work because the weather records support that. But there are many, many of those that it doesn't work that way, that we do not get the solutions. So when we're looking at the nature of evidence, we have to look at exactly what we have. Do we just have eyewitness testimony, and is it a single witness? Is it multiple witnesses from a number of different locations? And are they telling virtually the same story from those multiple locations? It's always important to go to the site if you can, so that you can see exactly what the terrain looks like, exactly what things are going on there. And like when we look at the video here, we'll see the terrain across the street from where this, from my security camera, so you can see what is there and was this a cause for this anomalous object on the video camera. But having good chains of evidence, good investigative technique, the closer you get to the event, the better off the information is going to be. And we have to realize that as people study the cases, or as they remember it in their own minds, or they see other information about it, they sometimes incorporate that information unintentionally into their sighting, and it kind of leads us astray. So the nature of evidence is important, and whether it's anomalous or scientific investigation backed up with some kind of physical evidence is important for us to do. As I say, we're going to talk about a couple of good sightings here in just a moment, so I will be back right after this. And I am back, obviously. I have to comment here. Sometimes doing these solo shows gets a little bit confusing, and I sometimes forget exactly where I am in the show. That's why I have notes, by the way. And one other comment, I will be putting up the video that I'll be talking about in the last segment on my blog, so you can see the whole thing and some of the other comments about it. So you can take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. But I guess it's a form of evidence, so we've got to take a look at it. But you'll be able to see that and maybe give some comments about it, and I'll give some more descriptions about it here. What I wanted to do in this segment is talk about some of the good sightings with multiple witnesses, or with other chains of evidence. Because as I say, eyewitness testimony is good to a point. We have to remember there's many, many pitfalls that we have to avoid when dealing with that sort of thing, and we have to be careful on how we gather that evidence. It's always good to have it backed up by some kind of instrumentality. Yeah, that's a word I picked up from Forbidden Planet, another word I like. But when we look at UFO sightings, we oftentimes just have the eyewitness testimony, but oftentimes we have additional things. One of the things I was going to point out here is this sort of phenomenon has been going on for centuries, decades at least. There was a pre-Kenneth Arnold sighting, and I say pre-Kenneth Arnold that I'm kind of interested in. It took place on August 6th, 1860. And I mention it only because there were two objects. One was red and one was green, flying across the sky. And their motion was described as undulating, which is a sort of the motion that Kenneth Arnold described as saucers skipping across the pond. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Here is a case from 1860 in which we get a description similar to what Kenneth Arnold described some 80 years later. Oh, by the way, that was from Norfolk, Virginia, if you're interested in checking that out. But when we look at these UFO sightings, one of the things we always look for are landing traces, if it's come close to the ground, if it's landed. Ted Phillips created a catalog of some 4,500 to 5,000 landing traces. This is where something touched down. Now, the problem with some of that information, according to Ted Phillips, is nobody saw a craft. Nobody saw anything. It was just a circular area that was found by farmers, plowing a field or something like that. I investigated several of those myself in Iowa in 1972, 73. In one case, the witness did see a cigar sheet, an egg-shaped craft with two small humanoids around it. And this was years after the Lonnie Zamora sighting, so I don't think the Lonnie Zamora sighting influences. Lonnie Zamora was the New Mexico police officer who saw the landed craft near Socorro, New Mexico in 1964, I think. That, by the way, that sighting we always thought was kind of standalone. It was just Lonnie Zamora seeing it. We've since learned, thanks to any number of different research, I think of Jerry Clark here as one of them, where they discovered other witnesses who were in the area. Ben Moss, another one of those, has done some work on that. I did a book on the Socorro sighting too, where I delved into that a little bit deeper and how there was some interesting documentation that went along with the sighting, not only the landing traces. So we have a landing, we have a witness, we have physical traces that are left behind by the object. And that becomes important because that's a separate chain of evidence. And there's a lot of things you can determine by the landing, by examining the landing traces and the soil samples. One of the problems with the Zamora case is it seemed to lift off with some kind of a chemical reaction like the rockets we use today. And you would think interstellar flight would preclude that kind of a engine because of the vast distances involved, which is not to say that a small exploratory craft couldn't work on some kind of a chemical reaction. The interesting part of that, when that soil was analyzed, they didn't really find anything that would cause the burn marks. There was no accelerants. There was no chemical residue left behind that they could identify. So you had an interesting case in Socorro with physical evidence. One of the other things is interaction with the environment. And I of course, did the Leveland book where the object stalled cars, caused radios to fade or filled with static, caused headlights to fade. And this was a time in 1957, starting with the Leveland, where there were literally dozens of these kinds of sightings all around the United States. It wasn't the first time this kind of phenomena had been reported. There were reports from France and South America in 1954 of similar types of things. And also where in one case, the witness saw the object sitting on the railroad track, and as he began to approach, a beam of light shot out and he was frozen there for a while. When it took off, there were indentations in the tracks or in the ties or in the area that the French police determined would have been made by something that weighed like 30 tons. So you've got the interaction with the environment by leaving the landing traces, but also the physical reaction of the witness, which is very interesting. We have an awful lot of photographs, and the unfortunate thing is, I believe that 99% of those photographs were taken by teenage boys, and 99% of those are faked. There are cases where teenage boys did take photographs and they are not faked, and I think specifically of the Lubbock lights. And I think I've mentioned before that I was in Lubbock, Texas on a different investigation. Yeah, it had to do with Roswell. But I just picked up the phone book on a lark and looked up Carl Hart Jr. He was the man that took the photographs. He was 19 at the time in Lubbock. And now we're in the 1990s, mid-1990s. He's in his 60s, I think, when I talked to him. And I asked him point blank, I said, what'd you photograph? He said, even today, I don't know. At this point, I think that he would have, had he faked it in some fashion, he would have come clean, because that normally is what happens. The teenage boys eventually wrap themselves out, explaining what they had seen, what they had done. But photographs are an important part, but we have so very few good ones. And they take a lot of analysis, and there's always seems to be some little glitch that casts doubt on them. And here I think of the McMinnville photographs from 1950 taken by the Trents. I can't imagine the Trent, a farmer with an unsophisticated farmer, I think would be fair to say, creating a fake UFO picture for some bizarre reason. But the problem is the object seems to be underneath some wires, some telephone wires in the distance. So he could have suspended a model from that. Had it been above the wires, we wouldn't have to worry about that. Analysis of the pictures has suggested that there is no wire there, but that's something that we had to consider. The Coyne helicopter case comes to mind, and this was another one where the interaction of the environment came place. They were flying back from I think they were taking flight physicals, and they were heading back to their base in Ohio in a Huey helicopter, the helicopter pilots. And they encountered a bright light that seemed to be coming out, a bright red light, and it finally got up and was hovering over them. They had been in contact with, I think, Mansfield Airfield in Ohio at the time, talking about it, and their radio failed. They had been talking to them. The radio failed when the object was in close proximity, and it took off. And at the same time, Captain Coyne, who was the aircraft commander, actually the pilot in charge, thought they were going to hit this object, and he put the aircraft into a dive and lowered the collective completely down there. And at the end of the sighting, they had actually gained altitude. And I've heard an awful lot of explanations for that. And I think I'm probably the only investigator who actually had the same training as a helicopter pilot that Coyne did. And the reaction in the cockpit was what I would expect. But what some of the skeptics says, well, Coyne accidentally was pulling up the collective, or the co-pilot was, without telling him. And I'm thinking, no, you don't do that. If you're going to take control, you take control of the aircraft. You say, I've got it, and you take it away if it's an emergency situation. So it's an important case because of that. There was some what we call electromagnetic effects involved with it as well, which is another way of another chain of evidence that we could examine on that. And of course, we can always take a look at the abduction phenomena, which does sometimes involve multiple witnesses and does sometimes involve other evidence. And I believe sincerely that the majority of abduction cases are the result of common psychological phenomenon, one of those being sleep paralysis. And this is a thing where you wake up, or on going to sleep or on waking up, you suddenly have a feeling of paralysis. You cannot move. And it's accompanied about 80% of the times of the perception of some kind of entity in the room with you. I mean, it's the exact description of these bedroom invasions that we talk about in the alien abduction phenomenon. And I'm convinced that some of those cases are relevant to that. I mean, they're not alien abduction, they're sleep paralysis. And I think about 50% of the population has experienced at some point an episode of sleep paralysis. So it's not an uncommon phenomenon. But with the Hicks and Parker case from 1973, there were multiple witnesses. They were taken, and I say Hicks and Parker were taken to Keesler Air Force Base the day after the sighting. This is 1973. The Air Force is not investigating UFOs anymore. They were taken there to see if there was any kind of radio activity involved. I'm not sure exactly how they were going to do that unless they had their clothes and everything. But anyway, they were taken to Keesler Air Force Base. And the officers there, including the intelligence officer, senior intelligence officer, conducted an investigation. And in that investigation, it came out that there were other witnesses who saw the event. In one case, there were 4 people in a car on the bridge that Phil Class said, well, you couldn't see the phenomenon from. They saw it. And there was somebody across the river, I think it was, who saw it. And they were talking the next day about it. Other witnesses have been found since then that were in the area and reported this. I look askance at some of that because I'm familiar with people inserting themselves into important events when they weren't really there. I don't believe many of these people were doing that, but there is that possibility, and we have to look at that. The important one with the 4 witnesses the Air Force identified in a document dated the day after the Hicks and Parker abduction that suggests something more was going on, something some event took place that didn't involve these 2 guys trying to hoax it. It was some sort of an event. And we have the additional information of other witnesses talking about that. So when we look at some good sightings, we have multiple witnesses, we have some good photographs with multiple witnesses, we have landing trace cases, we have interaction with the environment, we have the abduction phenomenon. And I will say again, I think most of the abduction cases are the result of terrestrial explanations and maybe psychological problems for some of the witnesses. When we did our research into alien abduction, we found some psychological anomaly that was about 30% of the cases, which I won't go in here because it just causes all kinds of aggravation when we bring it up. But it's information we discovered in the research. It wasn't a place we were going. It wasn't what we thought about it. For those of you interested in that, it's outlined in a book that Russ Estes, Bill Cohn, and I did called The Abduction Enigma. And I really didn't want to plug that book, but to understand what I'm talking about, you need to see that. When we come back, we'll take a look at the video and we'll see what we can determine from that. So please stick around. And I am back. I will not have to look at my notes anymore. What we're going to see here is a short video. It's only 11 seconds long. We won't get the full 11 seconds because of a problem with the transferring it from one thing to another thing to another thing, but we can get to see what I'm talking about. This took place in the last week or so. I have security cameras around my house. They're triggered by motion. There's a lot of deer around here, and sometimes I turn the cameras off. But one night at 12:24 a.m., a deer was walking across the driveway, and behind it you see this anomalous blob of light. It looks like it's, well, there it is. You see the anomalous blob of light going on there. You can also see a reflection of it behind the deer on the driveway there. There's another blob down the street. That's in fact a street light, and it doesn't move. So when you see the whole video, you'll see the one light move as you saw it move around. There's nothing over there that I can think of that would cause that light. I did take a photograph of it in the daytime, not the light, but a photograph. There you see it again, moving around. I did take a picture of that area in the daylight so you could see that there's nothing there that would have caused that light. I have been back upstairs looking out the window to see if something appears again at the same time or various times. I've never seen anything like that. Nothing else has ever shown up on any of the other video cameras. That's across the street view. You can see it's a forested area. It drops off back. The back drops off in a steep hill down there. There's no swamp or anything like that. You can see that the object was in fact in front of the trees. They're no more than 60 feet away from my camera. So there's absolutely nothing there that would have caused that that blob of light. I have no idea what it is. I have contacted a few people and shown them the video. They don't know what it is either. I bring this up because I'm puzzled. I think it's interesting. I think it has absolutely nothing to do with alien spacecraft, alien visitation. It's some kind of anomalous light that just appeared on this single occasion. And as I say, the cameras have been up for a year, and I have never seen anything like that in the past. I've seen a lot of deer. I've seen turkeys. I've seen rabbits. I've seen kittens on my front porch. But I've never seen anything like this at all on the on any of the cameras as we look at it. What caught my attention is, I mean, it looks like it's a perfectly circular light. It's obviously white. It seems to create a little bit of trail as it moves around, and then it goes off to the top and the camera, out of the camera range. So it's not a very long video of what we were talking about. So anyway, I'm puzzled by this. I'm about to submit it to the MUFON group here to see if they have any clues on it. I've talked to a few people. We haven't seen anything like that before. But I guess the point here is we've seen some other videos taken in other parts of the world where there's these anomalous lights like this. And it puzzles the people who have reported it. I think the APRO group had one of a light during the daylight, as a matter of fact, crossing below a camera. That was kind of interesting in that respect. So this might supply some kind of a solution for some of those sightings. The other thing is, I've always hoped to get something really exciting on this, but the cameras are motion activated. So the deer triggered the camera. when it started walking across the driveway. I always wanted one of those where you get the meteor fall or something exciting like that on the camera, but meteors aren't going to trigger my cameras. It has to be something. It has to be within 20, 25 feet of the camera to trigger it. It won't even pick up cars going up and down the street. And we set it that way specifically because we didn't want to pick up cars going up and down the street because the alarm would be going off all the time. It kind of defeats the purpose of the security cameras. So we set it up so that you had to be in a certain area to trigger the camera, and the deer do that. And then there's like 6 cameras around my house to do that. Nothing has shown up on any of the other cameras. Nothing shows up when I've looked out for that stuff. I've been outside a number of occasions when we've had some kind of astronomical phenomenon that's going on, looking at comets or meteor showers and things like that, and have never seen anything like this. There is a street light up the street from where this took place, but the color isn't really white. It's more of a orangey color. The one down the street is more white than the one up the street. So it's not a reflection. There was no car. As you can see, there's no car in the video. It's 11 seconds long, and I'll put the whole thing up on my blog plus the picture for those of you who are interested in kind of studying it. As I say, the one thing that's interesting is there's a reflection on the driveway of the light suggesting it's behind the deer, but it's in front of the trees. I think it's no more than, 18 inches in diameter, maybe 2 feet in diameter. So we can't expand it into some kind of spacecraft unless they're really, really small. And then I think, as I say that, I think of the scene from Earth versus the Flying Saucers, where the little ball of light is in the factory and the Army major shoots it down and it falls down. I didn't have time to get my pistol out and run out to shoot at it, which I wouldn't have done anyway, but I don't know what it is. But it's one of those things that I think complicates the entire UFO phenomenon, because here's something that's anomalous, and I know where it was. I've got evidence of its passing. If the trees weren't there, we could postulate it was much further away. The reflection kind of gives it away, suggesting it's something much closer, something small. Can't be an insect because it's the insect would show up on the camera. And I had some wonderful footage of wasps and bees around the cameras. I saved a couple of those because they were kind of fascinating. But the insect has to get very close to the camera for it to be triggered because it's so small. I have no idea what it is. But as I say, I've looked at the other footage that people have taken of things like this, and it reacts that way. It's not under intelligent control. It doesn't seem to be under intelligent control. It could be some kind of a robot probe. I think during the green fireballs, and these were the sort of meteor-like things seen over the desert Southwest in the late 1940s, around the areas where they were had dropped the first atomic bomb and were doing rocket research and that sort of thing in New Mexico. And it puzzled a lot of people because, according to the meteor experts, the color was way too green for them. They were localized in this one area, which made no sense to them. And they were trying to find an explanation for these green fireballs, which I don't think they ever found a satisfactory explanation. I know one of the great experts in meteorics had gone out. He was at the university in Albuquerque. There's got a great meteor collection there too, by the way. But he'd gone out a number of times trying to find fragments, and he had great luck finding fragments of meteors that hit the ground with his techniques. But he never found any fragments of this. There was a plan afoot to put cameras in the area that would record the scene throughout the night. And I think they actually got one camera going. Ed Ruppelt, in his book on the unidentified flying objects, said they never got the cameras up. They never got them working. They never got any photographs. But there's evidence in the Project Blue Book files they did get a photograph. They got one. I haven't seen it, and it's probably not very spectacular, but there is supposedly a photograph is documented. The point simply being there are natural phenomena that we still do not understand that I guess, confuse the issue. Green fireballs is a prime example. My video is a prime example. I don't know exactly what we would do to enhance it. We've tried to do what we could. I've blown it up as large as I can, and I see nothing back there that would have caused this light. In the wintertime, when the trees have lost their leaves, you can see some lights. There's I'll call it arroyo, a canyon-like area behind the houses there. And about a mile and a half away, there are some other houses. But with the trees fully leafed, you can't see those houses. You can't see any of that stuff. And besides that, it's obviously in front of the trees, not behind them. Once again, I don't know what it is. And we have a lot of these kind of videos that are taken. I know that skeptics say, well, if we've got alien spacecraft and everybody's got a camera in their phone, why don't we have better photographs? Maybe because they're so rare, maybe because sometimes, and I've reported on this myself, where the witness doesn't get the camera out in time. There's cases where the camera fails, especially on the cell phones, the cameras fail. And sometimes they record video, not video, but audio, but there's no picture. In one case, the guy said the UFO was too high. He didn't think it'd show up on the video, so he didn't even bother with it. And sometimes they're very short-lived. This, I got 11 seconds. And I don't know how long it had been there before the deer triggered the camera. It was there when the camera came on, and then it floated up and out of the screen. And I have to point out, it floated up and out of the screen. It didn't react like I would think a reflection would. And I don't know what it would have been reflecting from. I've seen nothing like that, as I said before. So anyway, that kind of is my exciting UFO sighting. It is a UFO. It's unidentified. Well, it's a UAP sighting, an identified anomalous phenomenon. UFO connotates to most people that it's some kind of spacecraft. I think that, it connotates that there is a object there, and there's no, as far as I know, there's no object. It's just a light. So it becomes an unidentified aerial anomalous phenomenon, I guess, is what it is. If you enjoy these monologues, these discussions of things, let me know at the blog. I will put this videotape up on the blog so you can see the full 11 seconds plus the photograph from across the street. And I'll put up some of the information that I've discussed here. If anybody's got any theories about what it is, let me know. I certainly don't have a clue as to what it is. And as on the blog, there's also other information that dealt with some of the cases I've talked about today. Level Land has got information on the blog. I did a book cleverly called Level Land. I did a book on the Socorro sightings and Lonnie Zamora. I've done a book called 1973, which deals extensively with the Hickson Parker abduction. And I will admit that I have talked to both Hickson and Parker. I found Parker to be a very genuine person and, frankly, not sophisticated enough to invent this tale of alien abduction that he's come up with. He passed away just a few months ago, unfortunately. But there's an awful lot of information and recordings of what he had said prior to his passing. And if you have ideas or people you'd like to see, let me know. And I'll try to get them on. I think there's more coming up on the Ramey memo. There's another guy who's done some investigating that may, in fact, duplicate the work that David Rudiak talked about just last week, and the things that he has done on his work on the Ramey memo. This guy kind of corroborates some of that information independently of David Rudiak. I don't think David Rudiak even knows who it is. So with luck, I'll be talking to him in the near future. And I shall be continuing searching out interesting guests for the program. I try to stay away from those that I think are less than candid with what they're talking about. Sometimes we have to interview those people to kind of clear the air, that sort of thing. Anyway, that's about it. Once again, take a look at my blog at kevinrandle.blogspot.com. The books are available at amazon.com. The 1973 book deals with Hickson Parker. There's the book on Level Land. There's a couple of new books on Roswell there that does have some additional information that was not published in the past. So there's a little bit of intriguing new information. I think it pretty well debunks the Project Mogul explanation and other explanations for the debris that fell at Roswell. Anyway, that's all I have for today. If you want me to do something, please let me know, and I will be back shortly, in a couple of weeks, next week, with David Muller, by the way, talking about the project that he's working on down in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So thank you for tuning in.